at Twin Harbors at the Bonge entrance, or whatever they call that. And I think that's where we were last time we did our cleanup. So this is on July 5th. And this is one of our big cleanups where we partner with Washington Coast Savers and the Washington State Parks, so that we get as many people out there as possible picking up all of the fireworks debris from the beaches. So we will be there from 9 to noon. And I think we'll be trying to do a count of what's brought in. Although in the past, sometimes stuff has been picked up or left at the beach, and so we don't get everything, but hopefully we'll be able to do some sort of a inventory of what people are bringing in. So 9 to noon at the Bonge entrance, beach entrance at Twin Harbors State Park in Westport or Grayland. And then our Hold On to Our Butts cleanup that we did in Olympia, downtown Olympia the other day. I'm looking really quick to remember what we got. We collected 3,743 cigarette butts from the downtown streets. And that wasn't even one of our good ones. We usually get at least 5 to 8,000, but we had, I think, 12 volunteers, and it wound up weighing in at about 3 pounds. So that was pretty cool. It would be so fun to get more people to do it so we can spread out more on the downtown. I feel like I never get as far as I want to. So that would be really cool. So we'll do more of those. We just do them for an hour because you get kind of carpal tunnel using the pickers for an hour straight. And so it just makes it kind of fun and fast. And just to throw out that we had some local businesses give some fun raffle prizes at the end. Osa Skinworks gave a whole CBD cleanser, which I don't think was cheap. And Stellar Juices gave a $20 gift certificate to their juice bar. And Watershed Botanicals gave a body butter. And then we had the glass drinking straws, gave us a glass straw and a little sleeve for it. So pretty cool prizes. We'll try to do that every time. I think we might skip July maybe, and maybe try to do one in August sometime, just because travel in July is tricky. Yep.
Sounds good. And then I think we still need to officially vote Amber in. So does somebody want to, who is in favor of Amber becoming our official volunteer coordinator for the Olympia Surfrider chapter?
So I would like to nominate Amber Palmer to be our volunteer coordinator for the Surfrider Foundation 2021-2022.
Does anybody second that nomination?
I second.
Perfect. All in favor, say aye. Or a hang ten.
Aye.
Or snap. Sweet. Welcome aboard, Amber. It's official.
It's official. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
It's a hugely important role. So I'm so excited to pass that baton on, because technically I'm not supposed to be doing a lot of the work I still do.
That's right. Yes.
I couldn't have said that because this isn't recording, but whatever. Awesome. All right. For the good of the order, is there any other chapter announcements that we have? I don't think so. Guys think of anything? Going once? Going twice? Sold. To Casey and Cassidy, thank you both for coming here to talk about your awesome work tracking ocean acidification. So I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm going to share my screen.
And do you
Just a moment.
Do you guys want questions at the end, or do you want people to just unmute themselves and shout them out, or type them in the chat? Do you have a preference?
Questions at the end sound good to me.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
me too.
Yeah. All right. My name is Casey again, and Cassidy is my coworker that's here with me, and we are going to be going over the Acidification Nearshore Monitoring Network, ANeMoNe for short. I help out with ANeMoNe. I help out in the field, but Cassidy is much more involved in the project than I am, which is why I asked her to be here as well today. So this is a group of volunteers out monitoring one of the sites. I believe this is in Birch Bay. So I wanted to start off with kind of describing what the goals are of the Washington Department of Natural Resources, and specifically in aquatic resources. DNR manages over 2.6 million acres of state-owned aquatic lands, and by state law, stewardship must strive to balance the following for public benefit. For one, to encourage direct public access to state-owned aquatic lands, to foster water-dependent uses, to ensure environmental protection, and finally, to use the renewable resources that are present on those state-owned aquatic lands. So these include gooey duck, oyster, other renewable resources that are there for public benefit. And then finally, as more of a guideline, to generate income in a manner consistent with those 4 goals listed above. And this income actually, it both is for operation costs, as well as it is put back into the Aquatic Lands Enhancement Account, which helps to fund the derelict vessel removal program. It helps fund science, and it helps fund restoration on state-owned aquatic lands. So it does a lot of good things. Climate change threatens and impacts our aquatic lands, and those are impacts that we're currently seeing, and we know which they will increase. Climate change damages public infrastructure, docks, and nearshore buildings due to storm surge, coastal flooding, and sea level rise. And it destroys commercially important fish and shellfish stocks and their ability to cope with rising temperatures, ocean acidification, and changes to the nearshore elevation. Those are factors that directly impact their success. And then finally, climate change impacts aquatic lands by a loss in biodiversity and ecosystem function as habitats move and are changed. When we think about monitoring stations that look to record changes that climate change is directly impacting in our region, a lot of these, and if we think of how ANeMoNe was set up, I want to recognize that a lot of the monitoring stations were in and are in deeper channels and in areas where we out from our local inlets and spaces in the Puget Sound. And so that was kind of the impetus of ANeMoNe, is to understand more what's going on within our local nooks and crannies of the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea. Just as a review, I'm sure we all know what ocean acidification is, but I wanted to go over the chemistry of what's going on. The ocean acidification does not mean that our oceans are acidic. It just means that we're moving the scale to an environment that's slightly more acidic than the alkaline nature of the saltwater or of the ocean. So, which makes it more difficult for shell building organisms to survive. So carbon dioxide is emitted by the combustion of fossil fuels, and is absorbed by the ocean, and approximately 50% of the carbon dioxide that has ever been emitted has been absorbed by the ocean. It's why we're not directly feeling the impacts, or there's been such a lag time for humans to experience the direct effects of this carbon that's emitted, is that the ocean does a really good job of absorbing it. What happens when carbon dioxide mixes with water is that carbonic acid is created, and there is an excess of these hydrogen ions. And the excess hydrogen ions that are floating around incur kind of a double whammy on organisms that utilize calcium carbonate to build their shells. They impact this calcium carbonate saturation state, which has to be at a level for which organisms, like any shell building organism, a crab, a coral, a mussel, an oyster, is able to pull from the ambient environment to build their shell and survive and to grow. The hydrogen will bond with the carbonate ions that are floating in solution and lower that calcium carbonate saturation state, which is the first impact to shell building organisms. And then the second impact is that the ambient nature of the water body that the organisms are living in is shifting closer to that pH of 7, or that acidic nature. So going less from the pH of ambient ocean water, which is like 8.2, closer to 7. And like I said, it makes it more difficult for shell building organisms such as oyster to build their shells and survive. Ocean acidification is not the only effect that climate change is having on the area's biology. Shifting, as an example, we can talk about eelgrass, because the ANeMoNe project, it has eelgrass as a large portion of what we monitor in ANeMoNe. But changes in sea level rise will impact our native seagrasses. Being that the photic zone that they live in, they're photosynthesizing, and they have this light that's readily available. Their habitat is going to shift as sea levels rise, and the depth of water increases above them. So we may see a shift in where these populations go. And in addition to that, rising temperatures will impact the vegetation in our region. So ANeMoNe both looks to assess and understand what's going on with ocean acidification in a closer or in a close scale within the Puget Sound, as well as it looks at what's going on with temperature and sea level rise in those and kind of the microcosms that we have within the Puget Sound. So getting back to DNR's goals and how we're stewards for state and aquatic land, DNR was an early participant in the Washington State Blue Ribbon Panel on Ocean Acidification, and the strategic plan that was created in 2013. And the two big takeaways and goals for DNR within this plan, and aquatic resources in particular, were to, one, develop vegetation-based systems of remediation and aquatic habitats, and particularly in shellfish growing areas. And two, to identify, protect, and manage refugia for organisms vulnerable to ocean acidification and other stressors. And one of these refugia that we talk about and can think about is eelgrass. Eelgrass, as they photosynthesize, will take up carbon dioxide and potentially create a buffer zone for shell building organisms, where the pH will be increased in that localized area. So it'll make it the thought being that it makes it easier for shell building organisms to pull that calcium carbonate. Well, for one, for calcium carbonate to be available to those organisms that need it, and for two, to make that ambient environment easier on the shells and less likely for dissolution. So both of these early actions within DNR kind of prompted the creation of ANeMoNe to understand what's going on throughout the Puget Sound in the nearshore environment. So at this point, I'm going to pass it on to Cassidy. We're going to talk about what ANeMoNe is and kind of the nitty-gritty about what sensors we have out in the field, what data we're collecting, and how you can get involved with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Cassidy. And just to reiterate, I'm a graduate student and also staff on the Aquatic Assessment and Monitoring team, and have been very intimately involved with ANeMoNe this year. So like Casey said, I'll give you a brief introduction to ANeMoNe, cover what we do and how you, Olympia Surfrider, could be involved moving forward. And so I'll kind of overlap with what Casey said just a little bit. Okay, so ANeMoNe, or the Acidification Monitoring Network, it was established in 2015 by our Aquatic Assessment and Monitoring team, and is a network of sensors designed to gather long-term data across varied marine coastlines of Washington State. As you can see here in the image, we currently have 10 different ANeMoNe sites spread throughout Puget Sound, all which were selected based on different criteria, including geographic gradient, the presence of DNR aquatic reserves, shellfish growing areas, as well as eelgrass populations and distribution. ANeMoNe specifically is interested in identifying and studying areas that may be more resilient in the face of climate change, and whether these areas can act as what Casey mentioned, climate refugia. Climate refugia are areas that can support sensitive organisms in the face of predicted climate change. For example, a place where waters stay cooler than surrounding areas can provide thermal refugia for species that are, say, temperature sensitive. And this happens to be the topic of what I'm studying for my thesis. And ANeMoNe has made that possible, which is really awesome. Next slide, please, Casey. So ANeMoNe has grown in size and scope since it was first created in 2015. And on top of the goals DNR has, ANeMoNe has 3 main goals. The first 2 are related, so we'll talk about them together. The first, to measure the progress of climate change by collecting high quality environmental data. This includes documenting the current status of marine nearshore conditions across a geographic range of locations, as well as conducting hypothesis testing experiments. For example, what is the potential for eelgrass to mediate conditions of ocean acidification? Or is there evidence of climate change stressors on different habitat? The second goal of ANeMoNe is to experimentally test practical management options. This includes what I'm studying for my thesis, and to develop climate change refugia criteria through analysis and comparison of ANeMoNe site characteristics and conditions. Next slide, please. So in order to meet these goals, we collect long-term data sets. The first being water quality. Water quality data is gathered year-round with sensors that measure pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll, salinity, water level. Our sensors measure the progress of climate change and ocean acidification to uncover the diversity of regional conditions. The second set of long-term data we collect is during the growing season in the spring and summer months, and it's biological data. This includes baseline data about shellfish larval settlement every year. We study juvenile shellfish to see whether climate change and ocean acidification are changing the timing and success of shellfish reproduction, to identify possible refuge sites. Essentially, we're looking at when and where the shellfish settle and in what densities. Also, during the spring and summer months, we measure the density of eelgrass beds near water qualities, near the water quality sensors we have. We measure eelgrass to explore how underwater meadows affect local chemistry and to see how eelgrass responds to climate change, kind of what Casey touched on as well. So in total, just an overview, year-round, we measure water quality. And additionally, during the spring and summer, we measure shellfish settlement and eelgrass density. Next slide, please. So our data collection is paired at each site, which you can see here at our Cherry Point site. What that means is that all of our data, except the eelgrass measurements, of course, are collected both inside an eelgrass bed and in a nearby site in bare sediment. This allows us to measure whether these eelgrass beds actually are making a difference on the surrounding water quality and the organisms living in those beds. Next slide, please. So to clarify just a little bit further, there are 10 anemone sites total currently, with 2 sensor packages at each site, one in eelgrass, one on unvegetated mudflat, continuously monitoring water quality year round, with biological data being collected spring and summer months. Next slide. So having said all of that, our third main goal of ANeMoNe is to increase public engagement with ocean acidification and warming issues. This includes developing a community science program to assist with sensor deployment and data collection, and using this ANeMoNe community science program to develop a climate change curriculum to bring awareness of local climate change issues to the youth in our communities. Next slide. One of the ways we address this goal is through the inclusion of site guardians, which is what we call our really awesome volunteers that help us. During the spring and summer growing season, we visit all 10 of our ANeMoNe sites during every low tide, which means visiting all sites about twice a month to collect data. This year, it's about 8 times. So each of our site guardians are going out 8 times. And since this effort is so widespread, we really do rely upon our volunteers from communities surrounding the sites to help us with these efforts. As you can see in the photos, the site guardians help us collect data and educate other community members, as well as clean biofouling. Next slide, please. So because these instruments sit in the intertidal or nearshore environment year round, biofouling is something we take really seriously. Biofouling is the growth of barnacles and algae on our sensors and instruments. So here in these photos, you can see Steve, one of our Cherry Point site guardians, showing what an Olympia oyster looks like before and after he cleaned it of biofouling. And it's just an example of what biofouling can look like after only a couple weeks in the intertidal zone, and it's pretty dramatic. So in those spring and summer growing season months, biofouling lowers the ability of our sensors to collect usable data, and its removal from our sensors is super essential for quality of data. And kind of saying all of that leads into why our site guardians are so important and what they actually do in the field, which is first, to ensure the validity of the environmental water quality data through biofoul removal. Our site guardians ensure our sensors stay nice and clean through the growing season. Next slide, please. Like I kind of mentioned, our site guardians also collect biological data for us, including larval shellfish settlement data by deploying these shell sticks, which are collected and redeployed every low tide cycle and analyzed for spat recruitment or shellfish larvae recruitment. Next slide. Our site guardians also collect eelgrass data, which you can see in this photo. I love this photo. This is at our Fidalgo Bay site, where the eelgrass is super abundant and really big and lush. So the volunteers out there count and measure eelgrass shoots near the sensors. We really couldn't do this work without them. Next slide, please. So just to touch on the data that we collect a little bit, the data we collect from ANeMoNe allows the DNR to provide scientific and technical support to aquatic programs, provide scientific review and recommendations for projects, provide data to DNR and other researchers in search of long-term nearshore data sets, and engage the community in science happening in their own backyard right now. Next slide, please. So we're about halfway through our field season this year, having gotten started in April. And so far, we've been continuing to collect our baseline data with site guardians, like I mentioned. We're also working to reintegrate more volunteers in a COVID-19 safe way. Last year was hard for us getting volunteers involved and keeping them active. So it's exciting to get everyone back out into the field. And we're also continuing to work on the ANeMoNe curriculum, incorporating students and teachers and classrooms into this research. And we are also integrating new research into ANeMoNe every year. One of those being in this photo, DNR staff is currently conducting experiments on how different water temperatures will affect eelgrass populations collected from 5 different ANeMoNe sites, including Cherry Point, Fidalgo Bay, Port Gamble, Nisqually Reach, Willapa Bay. And the photo you see here is of our mesocosms, which we have at one of our stations. And the experiment I just described was actually just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, and it was super successful. And we hope to continue these because these types of experiments can really provide us insight into how these different populations of eelgrass at ANeMoNe sites will react to warmer temperatures in the face of climate change, and how we can further focus our research at these specific sites moving forward. Next slide, please. I just want to close by saying that we really couldn't do what we do without all of our amazing volunteers, and we do have a lot of fun out in the field working together. And we are always seeking more involvement and additional site guardians to join our team. So if anyone is interested, or if you know anyone interested in becoming a volunteer and working with us, please reach out to myself or Casey or Cindy Donahue, who is our program supervisor, for more information and ways to get out with us. We have a lot of exciting things coming up, and we'd love to have you. So thanks for listening. That is all I have. I think we can take questions now.
And I'm going to stop the share if everyone's okay with that.
Sounds good. Thank you guys. That was awesome. Do you need a boat to be able to get to all of these sites, or can you wade out to some of them with some waders?
So all of the sites we have are designed to just wade right out to, and because they're all at low tide, oftentimes it's not even wading, it's just kind of walking out and checking on all of the things.
Have you ever lost any, like they just disappeared?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the first couple years were a big struggle. I wasn't present for a lot of them, but looking through the data, there are a lot of gaps just because we lost full sensor packages, unfortunately. But we've gotten a lot more efficient. We've learned ways to keep them where we want them.
Yeah, we've actually been successful at recovering packages as well. So we have our name on them and contact info and whatnot, but the sensors can be swept away by logs, and the winter is especially hard on them.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is great. I've heard about it, but now I know much more about it. Great project. Like so many projects, though, it seems pretty Puget Sound centric, with the 9 sites in Puget Sound and 1 down here in Southwest Washington. So it seems like Grays Harbor would be very deserving of a site, and we could probably drum up some site guardians for you. Is there any chance of getting a site? Yeah, me and Don, maybe a site in Grays Harbor.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. We are always looking for more involvement. I think what has been our hang up is staff and also volunteer interest. If we have volunteer interest out at Grays Harbor, I think it would be very realistic for us to make a site happen out there at some point in the future.
Yeah, we've, I have a European green crab site it's a sentinel site, and I've got a couple of volunteers that just love it. So
awesome.
Seems like there's a lot of places to do it, and with all the stuff like the port does out here with the dredging, and it would just be a really good place to put one.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, we should be in touch.
Okay. I can make sure everybody gets everybody's emails after this.
Yeah, I had a question. This is Don. But first, yes, I would certainly be too happy to help with anything in Grays Harbor. But I have heard that, and I don't remember where I heard it, but that the prediction was for decreased efficiency of the reproduction in Dungeness crabs because of acidification. Do you guys have any data on that, whether that's actually occurring already, or do you anticipate it's going to, and any idea what rate that might be?
Our team specifically doesn't, but I know I'm also in school actually, along with Cassidy. I'm completing my master's right now, and I just did a project on Dungeness crab. But I think the reproduction and has the successful success of the megalope of the Dungeness crab has been largely impacted by the blob and by other oceanic conditions that have kind of set have changed currents. And I know that there's a lot of research coming out of Oregon State University where they're interested and doing a really good job at tracking where those megalope go and how they have been impacted by big events like the blob, and how those are kind of legacy events that we see on down the line with the adult crab that commercial fishermen are interested in catching. So that I would look to some of the research coming out of OSU.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to drop a link to, there's a story map that's really cool that came out of, I know it from a Surfrider blog, but I think it's the OSU work that they're doing. I haven't actually gotten all the way through it because I just found it today, but it's just a cool story map. So, and I love maps.
I have a quick question. I used to do the marine monitoring program, the marine flights and boats and everything. So it was really cool. But a long story short, we would have trouble with our sensors with all the sediment. And your guys' stuff is right in the sediment. How is that causing really challenges? How have you solved that?
Yeah, I would say it does cause a bit of challenge. It's partially why we have site guardians going out every couple weeks for us through summer. We don't ask them to do the winter months because of how harsh it can be. And so that kind of falls on our staff to go out and check. But essentially having sensors checked every 2 weeks kind of ensures that sediment isn't accumulating because of certain tides or currents, and that everything is cleaned. And that's been doing a fairly good job for us.
And it doesn't impact your data?
I think to some extent, yes, there is some effect, but we've done a pretty good job at cleaning it and being able to look at tides and keeping track of how it's affecting our sensors.
And is the data transferred electronically, or do you guys have to do data dumps?
We are able to just electronically transfer. We hope in the future to make it more publicly available, just kind of live, but we're working on that now. So, yeah.
Yeah, it varies from site to site, but some of the sites that are more exposed tend to we tend to have a lot of issues with sediment and burial of our sensors in certain months. So it takes, yeah, a lot of maintenance. Yep.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one more. So one of the goals was, or maybe the purpose was to identify, protect, and manage refugias for organisms vulnerable to ocean acidification and other stressors. So what does DNR propose to do to protect these refugias?
So DNR has aquatic reserves throughout the Puget Sound, and those aquatic reserves are, I think that we're not being on the aquatic reserve team. I don't want to speak for how they're expanding those, but but those are set up in order to enable make sure that the activities going on in those areas was not impacting species that could provide refugia. And so that those could be eelgrass or kelp. And so apart from that, DNR is non-regulatory. So DNR isn't going to be policing those zones, but enabling, collecting the science that can enable management action in those areas. As far as further protection and the setup of or expanding those reserves is tied in with ANeMoNe.
They do things like transplant, right? Eelgrass, and do transplants, do lots of monitoring, lots of tracking.
Yeah, and our the other group within Aquatic Resources, that is science group, is fully invested in eelgrass. They're we're the aquatic assessment and monitoring team, and they're the Nearshore group. And the Nearshore group is actively looking at how to restore eelgrass beds and different techniques at which could be more effective than others at restoring beds. But that's more that's their side of things. And I can provide some contacts in terms of if anyone's interested in the restoration aspect to those scientists that are actively involved in those as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because in Grays Harbor, there's just a huge amount of dredging to keep the navigation channel open, and there's a fair amount of eelgrass, and it's documented now that because of the dredging and the very large ships that do a lot of transits, the sediment patterns have really changed, especially in the shallow areas. So that's, effectively burying eelgrass. Yeah, I just find that fascinating.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of regions in the Puget Sound where we do a great job of protecting eelgrass, but other areas that eelgrass is growing, that eelgrass is directly impacted by the activities that occur around it. So I think that this project is great at understanding a little bit more about how climate change is going to impact our eelgrass beds, and how these other stressors that may be incurred on the eelgrass bed, how those may be accumulated effects. But yeah, I agree with you there. It's that's unfortunate. Yeah.
I thought of another question. Curious about funding and how long the program potentially will be able to be sustainable.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. The program has been, we've had a consistent data set since it was established in 2015. And that has been achieved through volunteer efforts as well as our small staff, kind of guiding the whole program. So I think as long as we have a good group of volunteers and
Awesome.
as long as we're still around as a
Yeah.
group, the program should
You
exist.
made it through the last biennium, got new funding for the next
Yeah.
biennium.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
did,
As long,
yeah.
we
Awesome.
have, as long as we have a bank of sensors that we can deploy and
Mhm.
and retrieve and people to offline the data, the program will be there.
Awesome.
Yeah, the only talks I've heard are about expanding. So hopeful there.
Sweet. Well, thank you guys for spending your evening teaching us all about this really important stuff. And it's exciting to know that, your average citizen, even if they're not a scientist, can still contribute to like what many would consider like kind of, intimidating ocean chemistry issues. And it's kind of like the subtle stepchild of what more popularly known like climate change issues like sea level rise and warming temperatures and things. But it's arguably just as important and kind of out of a lot of people's minds. And so super stoked to have you here and share this and be able to sort of spread the word because it's so important. So with
Thanks
that,
for listening.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I will post this recording on our YouTube channel and I'll add links. And then if y'all want, I can share emails around as well. Lee, I'll connect you to Cassie and Casey and holler at me if anybody else wants your deets. And it is 8. But I did want to give Lee a chance to talk about her toxic site cleanup. So Lee, if you want to give a shortened, abbreviated teaser of what's going forward.
I have 4 slides that I'd really like to show just as a teaser. And if you'll let me do that.
Yeah, I'm going to make you a co-host. Casey and Cassidy, you guys are welcome to stay. We'd of course love you to stay, but I also recognize it's 8 o'clock at night and this probably is outside of your normal business hours. So you're also welcome to bow out if you'd like. And while Lee's getting that ready, Lee is our Twin Harbors waterkeeper, and I've worked with her extensively, giving lots and lots of seabed mining talks as part of our ban of seabed mining in Washington State that passed this year. Whoop, whoop. And then she also is one of our leaders with our yellow ropes cleanups and prevention efforts, along with Jill, who's done a ton of work helping organize and lead cleanups on yellow ropes. And she's also just a badass canoeer and hardcore marine debris remover. So with that, take it away, Lee.
Thanks, Liz, Flatter, and Jill. I've had a blast working with you guys. So I just want to take like 3 or 5 minutes to talk about some about toxic cleanup sites or MODCA, the Model Toxics Control Act, is the state's equivalent of the federal Superfund cleanup law. And so, Grays Harbor has more than its share of these toxic cleanup sites. And most of these sites, they have contaminated sediment, they have contaminated groundwater, they have contaminated soil, and a lot of them, like this picture, this is South Aberdeen, is where a mill, the Saginaw Mill was, and it's just so typical of Grays Harbor. They, these giant industrial sites go out of business and then they just kind of collapse on the shore and they're never cleaned up. And so there is this Model Toxics Control Act, and there's about 150 toxic cleanup sites in lower Grays Harbor, or the Grays Harbor proper around Aberdeen and Hoquiam. And there's a whole process where public participation is encouraged. And but really there's no cleanup happening right now, because the state has their system of kind of prioritizing how sites are cleaned up. And if a site is impacting a community's drinking water, then it's, it's usually cleaned up pretty quickly. But if it's not, and it's in a kind of a place that's out of mind for Department of Ecology, or then, the site just languishes and the pollution lingers on and on and on. So I have a, if I get invited back, I'd like to talk about 10 or 12 sites that are in Grace Harbor that you, if you all go surfing at Westport, you might drive by some of these sites and you might find them interesting. But I'm just going to highlight one now. This is the Pakonen Boatyard, and it's right next to the bridge in Aberdeen, where you go over the Chehalis River. So it's on the west side of the bridge. And this is where there was a boatyard that operated for about 100 years. And boatyards are, there's a lot of pollution that comes off of boatyards because the paint used in boats and ships is loaded with copper, and there's zinc and a whole bunch of other chemicals. So, back in 1890, when this facility first started doing ship maintenance and whatnot, there was no Clean Water Act. So, whether they sandblasted or scraped or, changed boat paint, it just went right into the sediment. And so almost all of that is still there, as are, all kinds of creosote pilings and, tons of other junk. And in 2005, when this company went out of business, they did a really superficial job at cleaning up kind of the really, really hot spots. But since then, no more cleanup has occurred. And so I just find this really interesting because, well, I lived in Bellingham. I was the North Sound baykeeper in Bellingham for 10 years. And in Bellingham, there's a lot of cleanups that are going on. There's a lot of old boatyards and industrial sites that are being cleaned up. And so I'm really working hard to try to get some action down here. And so that's why I give these presentations. Does someone have a question?
So Lee, what does it take? So if you were even to start with that boatyard, what does it take to start a cleanup or even to approach that?
Well, that's a really good question. So the state has to go through a whole process of finding the liable party, because they get most of their money from the polluter. And so if they can, and that's a really, really time consuming process. And so sometimes they can track down the polluter, and there'll be a consent decree or some kind of a legal process that requires the polluter to pay. But when they can't find a polluter, then it just languishes. They can drum up some state funding, but I think when I talk to the Department of Ecology, Model Toxics Control Act, the cleanup people, they say, oh, we don't have enough staff, or we don't have enough funds. And so I think that's the main problem. And so it's not going to be easy, but I think if there's more public pressure, that we can at least get started on one or two of them, because the site right next to this is a brownfield site, and there is money for brownfields cleanup. And so we have to get Aberdeen engaged, and kind of the city of Aberdeen, and help them, get them to apply for some grants. And so, yeah, that's a great question. And but I think there is a path forward with, you know, meeting with our legislators and trying to get more funding for this and that sort of thing. So yeah, I've got 10 or 15 more sites that I can talk in detail about, you know, what the actual pollution is and how it got there. But before I do that, oh, and there's this really cool mapping site. It's called What's in My Neighborhood. So you can, it's a Department of Ecology map tool. You can, you know, put in a city or zip code or a county, and then you'll see all the toxic cleanup sites on a map, and then you can click on one of them and, you know, and if there is a cleanup, if a cleanup is started, you can see all the reports and you can, you know, read all sorts of stuff about it. And then I also wanted to give a plug for this, what I call an ERTS. It's an environmental report tracking system. So this is a way that if you see some pollution when you're out and about, like whether it be stormwater pollution or, you know, maybe you're in a marina and you see, you know, gas and oil on the water coming off of a ship, or, you know, a fuel leak, or, you know, anything like that. There's a great, this environmental report tracking system tool is really easy to do. You can do it online, you can call. If you do see something, you know, it's really good to take a picture and make a note of the address. And I'm going to show you two things right in the Westport area that I sent in. Well, I sent an ERTS on this about 2 years ago. This is the one of the seafood processors. I think their pump blew out or something. They're not supposed to discharge anything into the water. They're supposed to collect all their processed water from fish processing and then send it to the wastewater treatment plant. And I ride my bike by here all the time, just kind of looking for this actually. And so this one day something was seriously wrong, and the whole area around their processing plant was filled with fish blood and guts and this gray water. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. So, you know, they had just discharged all this disgusting stuff right into the water, and that's against the law, and they got a fine. So that's how powerful this ERTS tracking tool is. So when you set, if you see pollution and you report it, an inspector has to go out and look at it. So that's one. And then just last week, this is in Westport. This is right across from the Acosta School. This isn't exactly pollution. It's a construction site that someone just cleared. It's like, I don't know, 3 acres. And they cleared it right up to a wetland. You know, I'm not sure if this is a lake or a wetland or a pond or what this is, but it's waters of the state. It's protected. And this area, you know, you can't just clear all the vegetation up to water. You know, Grays Harbor, as kind of conservative as it is, it has a critical areas ordinance. And so water of the state has to have a buffer. And, you know, it's probably a 25 or a 50-foot buffer. And also a construction site like this, especially the one that drains to water, has to have a Department of Ecology a construction site permit. And so someone that lives right near this area called me, because water keepers like to bust polluters and people that don't get the right permits, especially when sites are close to water. And they told me about this site. So I went out and I went out to where there was a no trespassing sign, and I was able to get this photo from the edge of the property and found out this site has no permits at all. So, you know, they didn't get a critical areas permit, they didn't get a grading permit, they didn't get a construction general permit, you know, no permits. And so now the Department of Fish and Wildlife is out there, you know, taking some action, and the Department of Ecology is out taking some action. And even Grays Harbor County, I think, is gonna take some action, even though they mostly don't do anything. But so that's really all I wanted to say was I can talk about more about how to file these reports and, you know, what kind of things warrant a report. And it's really great when people use this tool because it's so powerful.
Thanks, Lise. That sounds like a great topic for practically an entire another
Okay,
meeting.
that's what I was hoping to hear.
But thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that stuff is super important, especially in counties that don't have the resources to enforce or don't have the impetus to enforce or the desire to enforce. So it's really important. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Also, that map is terrifying. I was just looking at like how many spots in my neighborhood. I'm just like,
Yeah, they're all over. There's like, yeah, there's tons in Olympia too. So
Yeah, you know, a lot of developers just look at fines as a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Honestly, and it's thanks so much, Casey and Cassidy, for your presentation. That was great. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for
thanks,
having
everybody.
us. And please reach out, you know, if you want to be involved, or Lee, you know, if we can talk about setting up a site in Grays Harbor, that'd be awesome.
great.
Yeah, it sounds like in the past maybe we had someone who maybe was checking the Nisqually Reach site, but I don't. Do you have someone right now that's a volunteer that's actually? Do you still have a site in Nisqually Reach?
We do. We work with the Nisqually Reach Nature Center folks.
Okay.
Daniel Hull and I believe that's the program director. But we work with them pretty closely, and I know they're involved and they're helping us currently, but always willing to take on, you know, more people at each site too. The more the better, really.
Yeah, any of the nearby sites, Case Inlet is one, Willapa is the probably other closest, but
Port Gamble,
Port
Elliott
Gamble,
Bay. Yeah.
you know, we need volunteers for any of those sites. And Cassidy, we're gonna have a volunteer training at some point in the future, right, for next season.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. What was that?
Oh, we are having a volunteer training at some point.
Yeah, we typically do them at the beginning of the field season, which typically starts around April. But because we're really interested in acquiring new volunteers and getting folks back out into the field after this kind of COVID time, we're planning one this fall, hopefully. So if there's anyone interested, like Casey said, please reach out and we'll put you on our mailing list so you can get up-to-date information about what we're planning and how we plan to move forward.
This is Lynn. It looks like a lot of your locations are kind of in wider, big open embayments. And from my experience with water quality, most of the issues happen in the really small, pocket estuary embayments. It'd be cool to get some more sites in some really small, much smaller areas. Is that just a kind of where the public access beaches are? How do you guys decide where your sites are even in a small area?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with public access for sure. It also has to do with kind of geographic location and where we can access easily. A lot of it is on just kind of public access.
Yeah,
but we're really looking to expand in the future.
It'd be really interesting to compare, something like Ptolemy or some of the big, right up in Bellingham, the big bays versus the really small estuaries where the water just kind of swashes back and forth, and you get the low DO problems, and the
Exactly.
pollution just kind of hangs out there. The water
It's
doesn't
true.
exchange.
That warm water.
Welfare. Anyway, thanks everybody. Much appreciated. And yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
thanks so much.
Cool.
Enjoy the rest of your evening, y'all. And I will
Yeah,
post
thank
this
you.
on YouTube and we'll share it on our channels and stuff. So
Yeah, thanks for everybody showing up. It's nice to see your faces.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, bye.